So that right there is something that it's recording. Yeah. My goal with the podcast is to try to make it so that we forget the phone is there, or there is no microphone, but the microphone's there as much as possible, and it really is just to talk. I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and I enjoy the conversational ones more. And there's a balance. If one extreme is strictly interview, Larry King style, and the other,
right.
What I mean? Like, I'm more in the middle, but probably more leaning towards the conversational side. So even like Sam Harris is a little bit more interviewee. He comes with prepared questions, and I just like the idea of let's just see where it goes.
Yeah.
We've had some really good discussions at the coffee shop, Sausalito. Like, if we were recorded that, I'm like, that's a good podcast. We covered a lot of really cool stuff that I'm really into. Some interesting little insights popped up, and that's really...
Yeah, there's just that one one balancing factor for me is remembering that maybe those listening may not know all the references.
Yes.
And again, you can't have a conversation in which you can overdo that.
Uh-huh.
What we're talking about here when we mention Jim is a friend. Like, come on.
A podcast of footnotes.
Yeah, with footnotes that have footnotes.
Never get to the point.
Oh, yes,
prep.
it's like turns into a PhD dissertation.
Yeah. I try to find a balance with that.
Check your citations.
What I do find myself doing when podcasting and in real life is I do reference if I'm gonna say like a quote or something, I'm like, yeah, as so and so says, right? I find myself doing that all the time, and it kind of, my wife, it bothers her a little bit, and she'll be like, do you have any ideas of your own? Because I'm always saying like, well, Ram Dass says, or I'll say Paul says, or Sam Harris a lot. Sam Harris says it like this. And I'm like, yeah, okay, of course I have ideas of my own, but I just want to be, even if I'm not saying it exactly the way they said it, that's where that sort of concept was introduced to me. I don't know, maybe it was ingrained in me in college or something like you guys.
Well, also, if we're going to discuss Paul, which would be Paul Hederman.
ZenBitchSlap.com.
ZenBitchSlap.com, which is how Nick and I know each other. My name is Keith, and that's how Nick and I know each other, attending gatherings that are technically known as a satsang, which is a Sanskrit word for gathering in truth, I believe.
So, yeah.
And often is associated with gurus and disciples. In fact, it is from that tradition. Yeah. So anyway, if I'm gonna, it's nice to cite, say, Paul Hederman.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if that's the idea, if that's something that if there's an idea of Paul's that we're going to be talking about, certainly reference that's an idea of Paul Hederman's.
Yes.
And then move on from that.
And he's been the main subject of my first couple podcasts. So if anyone's listening to this as, in a series, they probably have checked him out by now.
Yeah.
He's really. I'm basically, it's just the Zen Bitch Slap fan club podcast, because I just keep bringing them up, him and Sam Harris, and it's just that's what has really shaped my way of seeing this stuff and interacting with it over the last couple of years. So I'd just be honest, I'd feel like I was putting on an act if I was pretending like all these were my ideas or my insights, and that's just...
Yeah, I discovered Paul about 6 months ago. We're in early July of 2019 right now, a little longer than 6 months, when I was beginning to look online, YouTube, for the resources around non-duality. I can't say exactly why.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Sometimes there is a reason why you begin to check out somebody or some subject.
I think that's most people's story, is they don't really know why. And in retrospect, maybe what their idea was at the beginning is nothing like when they look back at it, having seen what they've seen. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know specifically why around 6 months ago. I think I know the larger arc of exploration that led me there.
Yeah.
But I found, I began to notice these grainy videos.
Poor sound quality.
With poor sound quality. Partly it's the poor sound quality. He does have a microphone, but he just doesn't use it often. It's so great. It's so Paul. He's got the microphone. It'd be easy to plug it in with his advanced technical crew consisting of his wonderful partner, Amelia.
Yeah.
Anyway, I couldn't understand literally the sound volume a lot, so I would... and they're kind of grainy, and he spends a lot of time laughing at things he finds ironic, and I kept coming back. So this is an interesting conversation, and I think you and I both commented about other people over the years. Alan Watts, his audio library is amazing, and thank goodness for whatever forethought went into creating that audio library, because when you think of the 1970s, he had a lot of advanced thinking that what I'm saying may be worth listening to 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. So it's that same feeling. YouTube has become a great treasure trove and a great nightmare of stuff that should never have been allowed to pass. I'm all for, sometimes I'm watching something on YouTube and I'm all for censoring. That should not have been there, but not for the political basis. Anyway, began to listen to Paul and realized his message, part of his message is what goes back to my own long-term exploration of spiritual things, including cross-cultural religions. I come from a background of, I'm an Episcopalian by family of origin, and I've never met a devout Episcopalian. I don't think there's such a thing. There probably are. I understand there's an evangelical wing of Episcopalianism now, but it was sort of one step down from Catholicism. A lot of nice, beautiful stained glass windows, and the minister generally said things like, be good. But there was also a sense of the holy, an unspoken sense of the holy. That's moment
from when you were very young.
Like I was even an acolyte, which is it's a candle carrier. You wear a red robe with a white vestment over it, and the acolyte mother, a woman named Mrs. Seifert, would call my mother during the week, and she had a German accent. She's, can the boys serve this week? Can the boys serve?
Where did you grow up? Do you mind me asking?
In Northwest Ohio.
Okay.
Oh yeah, from the Midwest.
Yeah.
And so, so what I found from that, there was no theology drilled into me, but the beauty of the stained glass windows, the quiet in the 3 seconds just before the 10 o'clock service began with a pipe organ from heaven itself. That loud, not word isn't quite loud, but amplified quality of organ music, the quiet of the sanctuary, and then we're walking up the aisle to the front with carrying a candlestick that's been lit.
It's like a little spiritual experience. It's like a little ritualistic.
So
to evoke that feeling. Yeah.
I grew up, unlike a lot of my Catholic and Jewish friends who seem to spend most of their lives throwing off their Catholicism and the time with the nuns or the guilt of their Judaism. I didn't have any doctrine. I didn't even get confirmed. So what I came out with was a sense of the numinous, what Rudolf Otto, the theologian, called the numinous, the holy, the sense of the holy.
Yeah.
I picked up a book in college called The Sense of the Holy, and he was describing the experience of the holy without linking it to theology. So it set my dials to look for existential, meaning-based messages, which led me to Joseph Campbell, which led me to Robert Bly, the great mystical American poet.
This is in your early
20s.
late teens, early 20s.
Oh yeah,
which is
20s
perfect.
and 30s. Yeah, man. So I don't want to spend the whole. I'm not recounting my entire.
But but if this was a movie, that's the age you would be when all this stuff would be introduced.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And I didn't have any guilt about exploring it. It wasn't like my family will disown me because I'm not a good evangelical Christian. I know friends who have had that struggle.
Yeah.
Dad and Mom, I'm glad the Bible is literally true for you, but I think it's a subset of a larger set of truths. Yeah. I didn't have that. So I mentioned I discovered in my thoroughly amateur studies of comparative religion, the distinction between the via positiva and the via negativa, the positive path of spirituality, religious study, exploration, and the negative path. Positive path is when you affirm what God is. You affirm the divine in terms of the divine's qualities of plenitude, graciousness, grace, abundance, overflowingness. And the negative path is neti, what the East Indians refer to as not this, not that. God is not that. Yes. And that is what Paul Hederman's, a big part of his message is identifying what's not.
He's the master of neti that I've come across.
Exactly.
He's so
for lack of a better way, I still haven't found a better word for it, but I say he's so disciplined, which is funny because he's really like a sort of chill, almost late, like he brags about being lazy, but he's so disciplined in that message, sticking to it's not that. You know, like he doesn't even indulge. I'll see as I like start talking to this with certain people, I'll see the urge to start explaining what I am or what we are.
Yes.
Right? Like starting to go into that. I forgot was it a Sanskrit word?
The via positiva, to affirm what we are.
Yeah,
we are the infinite.
Yes.
We are the absolute. Mm-hmm. I have a set of those too. There's no boundaries.
Yes.
And
I feel the drive in me to want to explain it in that way. And I see that Paul is so disciplined and he doesn't even touch it. It's just not that. It's not that. See what you are from what you're. See what you're not from what you are. Right. That's really what it is. That's. He's so just disciplined in that I really appreciate that. And that's why I feel like his is the only message I can listen to constantly, every week, you know, almost every day, really, if I'm in the mood for it, because I know that it's just relentlessly pointing to, it's almost like the illusion. If you look at the ego as an illusion, as an imaginary construction, you know, of our imagination, just like it's an illusion. It doesn't even give you a chance to think for a second, well, maybe there is a self. Like, no, he's so relentless in that. That's why his message, similar story for me, you know, along the way, I feel like finding his message was the finale to this, in this search of, you know, a lot of the positive, the affirmations, and saying, man, it's getting me a lot of the way there. In my day-to-day life, I'm seeing, yes, I am, you know, everything. I am the infinite. I'm timeless. You know, that's very Muji. I was listening to Muji for about 6 months before I found Paul. It's a lot of, yes, I'm that. And then, but Muji also, what I really like that he does is he says, he asks the question, who? That's very Ramana. But, like, who is it that wants to be free?
To know, yes.
Yeah,
who's looking for this?
To know? Yeah, who would? And so that is always really helpful. That's something I use day to day for sure. Is it who is it? Who is it? And then don't answer the question for myself, because that which is going to answer the question is going to be more of that. You know, if it is from identification with self, that's asking that question. Then it's going to be identification with self that's answering that question. Let's just ask the question, which is just a little reminder that I'm not that, you know. So I got to remember those two words. I might write them down.
Yeah.
Posid. Is there Sanskrit?
Well, then not so much. It's actually Latin, I believe. Via positiva, the positive path. Via, the way. Positiva, meaning positive. And it's the path which affirms the bounty of God, the plenitude of God, the overflowingness. I remember when I encountered the Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus. I had a teacher in my 20s, not a spiritual teacher, but a mentor and guide with a small satsang, I would say. Yeah, we didn't call it that. But I was
very Joseph
truly,
Campbell.
Yeah.
To have a mentor at that age.
It really was. It was my Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Right on.
And he had done a lot of meditation in the 50s and exploration of the Eastern stuff, 1950s, which, remember, those of us listening here, those of you listening, if you take for granted the convergence of Buddhism or the arrival of Buddhism in the West or in America or California, wherever you are, as recently as two decades ago. It's a very recent transmission. So if the 1950s, if you were interested in the Eastern paths,
good luck.
You were and you were looking.
Yeah.
You were really looking, because it was a wasteland. This was the Eisenhower administration. This was the McCarthy era.
Yeah.
And so to be interested in Buddhism. So in any case, my teacher, and I put this capital small t, first. Introduced me, and we read some books by Plotinus, the Neoplatonic philosopher, and one of his ideas was the one. He took the path of affirmation. The one.
Well, I think Pluto is very affirmation too, right? Like,
Plato.
Pluto. Oh my God, Plato.
Yes.
Yeah. It was all about, like, there's a perfect form.
Yes.
And everything is striving towards that.
Toward perfection, and so there are ideal forms, and the matters of this world are interesting to the degree that they fall short of the ideal forms, the archetypes.
Yeah.
So Plotinus would talk about the one as being infinitely, and this still informs me at times, the oneness, the one as being infinitely overflowing. That it's really the idea that God is both the divine, the source, is both transcendent to this world and immanent in this world. So we feel the presence of God, but God is in no way diminished by anything we feel of God here, because the source is infinitely boundless. There's a bounty to the source. So God is present in every point of this universe, right here, right now, and God is not God is also a source that surpasses it. Like, imagine a waterfall that is not exhausted by the river that it creates. We only know the river because of our boundaries most of the time, but the source. So that's the via positiva. I think both paths, the path of negation, I am not this, I am not that, which is so useful, like, oh, that emotion that keeps bothering me, I'm really not that.
I think in
It's
day-to-day
there,
life,
but it's...
for me, that is the most skillful, helpful thing. So there's a lot of things. I always had a drive towards spiritual things, but sometimes I get emotional when I say this. I think I'm going to do it today. What really brought me to it was I got married young. I had 3 stepkids. I've had 2 more kids of my own since then, and I have no parents in my life, so I had not, everyone's shit is their shit. I didn't have the craziest childhood. I had an unconventional sort of, childhood. And what really brought me to this was like, I gotta pull my shit together because I have other people counting on me.
Because of what?
Because I have other people counting on me.
Got it.
You know what I mean?
Got it.
And if I would have continued to indulge in that sort of like my emotions and my reactivity and all that kind of stuff, if I would have continued to indulge in that, bad shit would have not only happened to me, but I had the people that were counting on me, these kids and this family that was counting on me. So the necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes.
Yeah, it was like either you figure out how to pull yourself together, or else, it's all going to fall apart. And that's what led me to getting therapy, like going and seeing a therapist, and then also reintroduced me to Buddhism and all that sort of stuff in a different way, of like seeing, like the first shift of, just because you think something crazy doesn't mean you gotta listen to it. Just because you feel something that's intense and overwhelming, you can get enough space to go, that which is feeling it actually isn't it, right? And in a very practical way, that's what brought me to like literally just in my day-to-day life, this stuff, like Paul talks about, you'll know the tree by its fruits.
Yes.
I saw the fruits of like, I'm not being reactive, I'm not losing it, I'm not yelling, I'm not, there is something good to this. And that sort of, that dance of like, I really enjoy this stuff, it's cool, and it's improving my relationships with people, and so then I'm gonna pursue it more and more. And so it's like, which was driving which, you know what I mean? And I really dove really deep into it and was listening to, hundreds and hundreds of hours of Buddhist stuff and Alan Watts, and this is all, I was revisiting it after having a childhood of sort of being interested in it and all that. But that what you're just bringing up just now, like being able to see an emotion as not you, to see a thought as not you, is like the most valuable thing for this action figure traveling through this life. And then Paul is just like that on steroids. Seeing none of it is you. You know what I mean? And it really is like, I listen to his message so much and I see the rational mind trying to grab onto it, and it's like a practice of just like, you're not going to make sense of it. Just see the fruit from the tree. Like the fruit, obviously the action figure's never been this chilled out. It's never been this like okay, like he talks about a lot, like okayness or enough. You arrive at a place of enough. What more could you fucking ask for than that? And so that just triggered when you brought that up. I had to.
Yeah, and one of the things that when people begin to listen to Paul, at zenbitchslap.com.
YouTube.
And we don't get any money for mentioning that name.
We should
talk
see
to
if
Paul
Wade
about
wants
that.
to do
What's our cut?
advertisements.
Actually, I feel I recommend that website as much in the same way that I would recommend someone get more sleep if they were over not getting enough sleep. It's like it's about well-being.
Yes.
And one of the
agree.
things that one of my moments of recognition listening to Paul Hederman was, number one, the audio quality is not great with a lot of the talks, the video quality, and also I noticed if you begin the talks start on YouTube mid-sentence.
I kind of love that.
So the conversation is going. He's just picking up on it. But I had the same thought you did and the same experience. I thought, much of this is going over my head. I don't even understand the reference points. Mm-hmm. He often will say, I'm throwing this over your head, and you're trying to reach it and it goes over your head, but it's landing where it belongs because it can't miss because the target is everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, if you would transcribe that sentence...
Unrational thing to say.
Yeah, but it is actually a complete sentence.
Yes.
He's throwing it over your head, beyond your ability to catch it, and it lands... The target is everywhere, so it can never not land in the right place.
It actually is rational.
That's a coherent sentence, but what is the reference point? Throwing what? Is it so I'm immediately going to baseball, and I'm not a baseball fan. Throwing it over my head. So it finally took some time for self-referencing, like, I'm actually among those who do not know what the reference points are, and he's actually referencing that. Yeah. And he also would say,
that's a big improvement.
When I give a talk somewhere, sometimes the sponsor of the talk will come up and say, Paul, great talk. I want to give you some feedback. People are saying that you always say the same thing, that the message doesn't change. And Paul would say, bingo, it doesn't change. I say the same thing,
point.
Which is not to say he literally says the same thing, but the integrity of Paul's message for me is he says, look, several years ago I walked into a meeting, not unlike this, and I heard a message that resounded with me. Mm-hmm. There was a deep, unspoken yes. And I have continued to listen to that message and listen for, and I thought, wow, I understand what he's saying. So there's just
I would say what is unique about Paul's message that I haven't really seen, I've seen people hint towards it, but not hit it on the nail on the head like he does, is that unspoken yes hit, and then he saw in the other songs he was going to that people were they were grabbing onto the message and identifying with it as self, and that activity of the realization and then self clinging to it and grabbing onto it, that's what his message so directly continually points out, that your spiritual pants are down. You can pretend like you got them hiked up real high and you're the one that gets the message, and you're experiencing self as no self, but he points to the illusion of that again and again and again, like no one ever.
And when he talks about when who you really are, here's what's really so, then the mental structure, which is his basic term for small mind, the everyday mind that grasps and turns that into a moment of, I got that, I understand it, and grabs
seeing
it.
That movement.
Yeah, that whole movement process. Essentially, we could summarize it by, I was talking with a friend about it the other day. It's interesting. She said, what is your friend Paul, what does he talk about? And I said, well, why don't we could listen to one of the YouTubes? So we listened to one of the YouTube talks. And she's a yoga student and long time, I'd say, influenced by Eckhart Tolle. So she's open to the kind of thinking of mystical, perennial philosophy. And she sat there and listened to this talk by Paul Hederman up in Toronto, one of his talks. And afterwards she said, I just don't understand what it was saying. And I said, that's terrific.
That's great. It's better than you saying you do understand.
Yeah, because the part of, and it was, so at some point she said, it's about selfing, right? Something called selfing. Yeah. And that is, so let me give you my best summary of Paul's framework on what he calls selfing, so we don't just talk about it. Right now, there's the experience of seeing. There's also the experience of hearing. It's just hearing. There's hearing going on. It's a verb. Seeing, hearing, feeling. tasting. I'm drinking this coffee, and I just added the word I to it, which is very important to the idea of selfing.
Real quick, I gotta just get this out. So I was doing Sam Harris's Waking Up app this morning, and
Yes.
it was all about hearing. And he was talking, it's so simple, I've heard it before, but it just hit so good today, of realize sounds popping up, and realizing that you have no volition over them. You can't go like, I didn't, which is very Paul, right? Like, once you heard it, it's too late. There's no stop.
There's no one ringing the bell.
Exactly.
And besides, you don't know that there's a bell.
Yeah.
There's only the hearing of something that you call a bell.
The actual, we even say arising, but that's even putting a hint of time into it. It just is.
Is an isness to it.
Yes.
It is.
In this, there is noise. And then as soon as it's there, it's gone. And man, his app, I can't freaking recommend it enough. Sam Harris Waking Up app, meditation app. It's expensive though. That's the only thing, is I got in early. I only paid $1 a month. So, but it was like a spiritual experience. It was like a disappearing of, and you're just sitting there, sound, and you get this feeling. It's just like, man, the whole story of hearing something, and then a judgment on the hearing. That was a nice sound. That was a bad sound. All that story comes after the sound. So
exactly. No, that's exactly it. And what Paul does not often say directly, but what's implied, is based on present evidence alone. Not resorting to anything you've read or thought, heard from a spiritual teacher. Right now, based on present evidence alone, there is hearing.
Yeah.
There is seeing. There might be feeling.
Yeah.
There are 6 sensory gates, you could call them.
Yeah.
Seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, and thinking, which of course is the most active in most of us.
As Paul would say, and a whole lot of thinking about it.
And a whole lot of thinking about all of it.
Yeah.
And so there's a hearing or seeing, and then there's mental structure, part of the mind, grabs it and says, I heard that.
Yes.
I see that.
Yes.
And then it moves itself to the front of the line.
Yes.
And at least allows the inference that it's been there all along.
Yes.
The I that just heard that, which is actually just a hearing. There's hearing. The mental structure says, I heard that.
And then it puts itself
At the
Someone
beginning.
Needs to make an animation of this.
It really is I see
know
it
you
too.
said
There's
that
an
before.
animation of that
A
too.
kid's book,
I even
something.
did a little chart one time.
Yeah.
I was going to show it to Paul. I said, is this what you're talking about? Thank goodness I didn't.
I know. Rip it up.
And so there is that. And of course, the other pieces that sort of help me click with this are the idea that, as for the I, the basic account of this, that we are not born with a sense of I.
Yeah.
In the personal sense.
Yes.
For the first 18 to 24 months of life, we are, the newborn is everything. The newborn doesn't have any reason to doubt that it's everything, doesn't have the cognitive apparatus probably to even reflect on that.
Exactly.
It is just the same. And there's the mother, but it doesn't call it the mother. There's the breast, but doesn't call it the breast.
It clearly is awake, conscious. The lights are on, but there's no story being told about any of it.
No story being told.
Yeah.
And
There's no grasping of, that's my mother, these are my hands. You look at kids, I mean, we were talking about it, I think, at coffee last Saturday or whatever, that you see a kid looks itself in the mirror, it doesn't know. It doesn't go, that's me. It's looking at, it just sees another kid. And we just look at that like, oh, that,
how's my hair?
Yeah.
Or how's my...
Exactly.
I'm going to
But
change
that's
my shirt.
so freaking profound. And when you hang out, obviously I've got 5 kids, so I spend a lot of time around little pre-language kids. And you see, they're just pure, luminous emptiness.
Oh, yes.
And I want to cry sometimes, just looking into their eyes. And then seeing slowly, around 18 months to 2 years, you start seeing a self-identity. Self-consciousness, aware of that it is...
An I.
It is a separate from... It's a subject amongst all these objects. And it's a really trippy thing to watch, And it's very informative to as a adult action figure. That's all this structure is put in place very strong. I was one of those once, every reminder. So what was the process that happened that got me to where I'm at now? It's that's why people say kids are the best teachers, or dogs and cats are the best teachers because they're just there.
They are
pure,
totally just there.
Luminous emptiness in this moment. They couldn't be anywhere else. And we're in this moment too, but there's a whole lot of activity going on trying to convince us that we're not, you know.
I'll be sitting at home sometime with my, in the living room, and my golden retriever's across the room on a couch. He'll be sleeping, and he'll get up and turn his head toward me and just look at me. And I'll be reading, and I'll look at him and say, "What's up, bucko?" And he just looks at me, and he tilts his head, and I tilt my head. And just this direct thing going on.
There, yeah.
And it reminds me, he's my Zen teacher. He's just his presence.
God. And like Paul says, interest and attention. That's been another, like, if you want to see the fruit from the tree of my day-to-day life, of a sense of just peace and okayness and contentment, is realizing that the interest and attention is just spent most of its life here in the thought system, in the planning for the future and the thinking about the past. And when that interest and attention can be redistributed, like you're there making eye contact with your dog, the interest and attention is completely there.
It's completely there.
It's completely there.
And there's no I'm looking at my dog.
Yeah, no, it is
and
that.
he's looking at me. Oh, that may kick in, though.
Yeah, of
Oh,
course.
that the mental structure grabs hold of it and says, "Oh, I had this great experience with my dog this morning. Let me tell you about my experience with my dog." Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's also part of the fullness of it all, but you just basically lost it. And you can say, "Oh, there's that part of me there's that thing that did that," and there's you're back in that. You're back in the seeing of it.
Yes.
Paul often says, the mental structure is the fastest draw. It's the fastest draw in time. In the realm of time. Time versus the reference point to time is eternity or no time, timelessness.
Yeah.
So in time, there's nothing faster than that. You cannot outdraw it. But he says the only one thing that can outdraw it is timelessness, because its gun is already out of the holster at all times. Sheer presence.
Yep.
So you got outdrawn again, and you can see that from the place of that's not it either.
Yes.
And it's just all it. And going back to this thing about the newborn. So the irony of all this is, I've come to reflect on this myself, sort of being on a, quote, spiritual path, which I'm not even sure what that phrase means at this point, but I would have once said, I was on a spiritual path, etc.
So you not knowing what it means is an improvement.
Probably,
probably,
and not wanting to know, wanting to have,
caring, losing interest in it.
But the newborn, around 18 or 24 months, not only comes to have a sense of I, but is reinforced massively for that sense of I. It's not just the toy, but that moment for most parents.
Yeah.
She said, "My toy." He said, "My toy." And I am Keith. He said, "Me, Keith," pointing to me. Yeah. Those are developmental milestones in the conventional.
Of course.
And look, nobody's here to say that having that sense of self is some kind of, at least I'm not here to say, as some Gnostics might, that it's some kind of mistake.
No.
It's about 70 from what people who've studied these things, into evolutionary biologists and psychologists, there's evidence that sense of I, the agency of I, is about 70,000 years old. It's very recent, maybe 100,000 years old, and we're never not going to have it.
Yeah.
But it will probably, as more people, I like to think, as a greater percent. Perhaps we're on a learning curve. Let's say.
Yeah.
And the learning curve has to do with a greater recognition of, after this long era of separate selfness, we could begin to see this separate self in a larger context in which we will always have access to it.
Yeah.
The idea, there's one thing I've noticed in the non-dual circles, the conversational circles. If you get online and see any of the chat rooms, you see people who've had a first non-dual experience who've got it, right? Yeah. They've got it. They'll begin to they'll talk about it, and they'll begin to put I and me and mine in quotes. It's a way of saying, it's a way of very awkwardly referring to that provisional nature. And it's more like, hey, drop the quotation marks.
Exactly.
It's a navigational device.
Yes.
Once you realize that the I is not totally linked to this body or identify the body, you don't have to constantly apologize for saying I, because I can be this boundlessness.
That's so good.
But you will always,
Yeah,
So
it's a navigational device. That's really good. I like that because I've been thinking. So same thing. Like when it first came up for me, I was probably the first non-dual experience, right? In this little story over here, I had that feeling of like, I wouldn't even say, when I would go to explain it, I wouldn't even say me. I'd be like, this had it. You know what I mean?
there was the awareness
There was the
that
awareness.
this awareness came. There came the
You
recognition.
become like a non-dual lawyer, like
Exactly. Removing any first-person pronouns,
Yeah.
or personal or plural, singular or plural.
Yeah, and so then I have my kids at the same time too, and I'm like, how am I gonna not condition my children to feel a sense of I or ego and stuff? And I've come around to a place now where I'm like, that's my job as a father. Like, playing this role is to construct a healthy ego so they can survive, so they can navigate through this. You know what I mean? Like, just continually confusing them and saying, you don't exist and you are, a piece of a whole, system, and on and on and on. It'd be like not giving them a map to get through the forest, Like, okay, good luck, head out there. And that basically the ego, I love you saying navigational device. It's like, just, hey, these are the rules of the game. It's very Alan Watts. Like, these are the rules of the game. These rules were made way before I came along or anyone or you came along. And here's the rules, but realize it's a game. And that's, you want some relief and some, like, take some of the weight off of it. It is a game. So be good, do the best you can at playing the game. Enjoy it, be the best you can. The game being life, the game being navigating through this dreaming, right? But if you can keep the recognition the whole time, it is all just a game. You'll really travel lighter. That's like really critical. Whereas being stuck in it and believing it's all real, you just might lose your mind.
Well, and also Paul Hederman talks about something. And let me just make a sort of meta note that his message is a combination of his deep experience in recovery,
Yes,
and his deep experience with spirituality and non-duality. So he's very rare in his ability to hold a conversation about those two reference points and moving back and forth seamlessly in a way that if you've never been in recovery and don't have any need to be in recovery, you'll still resonate with what he's talking about, because his larger point in his critique of AA, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous, is the deepest addiction we have is to the idea that we are a separate, independent, long-lasting self or action figure. But on that very point, I think a huge part of the brilliance of his message, he describes how when he first discovered non-duality, I believe he was living in Hawaii at the time, and his girlfriend's going to work, and she says, you clean up the dishes. He goes, yeah. And she comes home and says, you didn't clean up the dishes. He says, no Paul. He says, there's no Paul here. There's no self. She said, well, then you get your ass out of here. You clean up the dishes. So the beautiful part of that is his work in recovery. With people who say, well, I've had they have not done their recovery work. Mm-hmm. And they latch on to the non-dual, the we are all one, there's no self here anyway. And he says, no, there is a self. You need to do all 12 steps.
Absolutely.
And if you want me to be your sponsor, you're going to do these 12 steps as if there is a self here. Mm-hmm. He doesn't quite put it this way, but as if the action figure is real. And his metaphor on that is, if someone is right on the verge of going out and having a major drunk or returning to cocaine or turning to some kind of dissolute lifestyle that could be very destructive, he said he doesn't reinforce their idea that there's no self going through this. He says there's a fire here. He gives them a pail of fire. And the pail of water. Pail of fire.
That would be
that's a good one. That's the non-dual message. You need more fire. Extinguish the self in the embers of your illusion.
That was a Freudian slip. That was very Jungian.
That's exactly right. So if somebody is suffering at that level, they are suffering as a separate self. Exactly. And to tell them there's no self that's really going through this is completely irresponsible. So he says you hand them a pail of water. Yeah. Now, if they continue to have this problem
of showing up at fires,
he says, there's a lot of fires that break out around you. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Just begin to look at the coincidences here. Lots of fires. So this time I may not have a pail of water. What are you doing with your life? Yeah. So he's noticed that there are a lot of people who discover in their recovery period, they have these. It's not unusual when you're going through recovery to have a non-dual, to have a sense of the utter. Through all your use of drugs and alcohol and extreme states, you could very easily pop into a recognition that there's nobody ever here. The lights are never accept everything. I am actually everything. Well, that's a recipe for becoming a drunk Buddhist.
Yes.
A drunk Buddhist, meaning you know the truth of non-duality, and it doesn't really matter if you drink. So you go out and go out. Yes, it does matter if you drink. You've got a wife or a husband. You've got children. You've got a job. It does drink, and you're not who you think you are too. They're both true.
Exactly, and I think that when the action figure is in that state of extreme addiction, and you're in those habitual patterns, never are you more vulnerable to selfing coming in and claiming that.
There's no self.
And using it for, to do more of its bidding, to do more.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So, yeah, definitely there is a balance of finding yourself in a certain place in life, within the dreaming, to where the message can be entertained in a healthy way. For sure. I definitely see that. A lot came up for me as you were telling your story. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah.
There's all these. I see the algorithm going off of, boom, that reminds me of that. That reminds me of that. One thing that I thought of was, have you heard of, he's kind of a underground guy, John Vervaeke? He's John Vervaeke. I hope I'm saying his name right. He's a professor of Toronto, I think. You know Jordan Peterson?
Yes.
So he's colleagues with Jordan Peterson. And he's
at the same college now, or went to college?
Well, they taught at the same college. Was it University of Toronto? I think.
He was at Peterson was at Harvard for a period. I think he was just a lecturer, or maybe he was a full professor. But now he's back up in Toronto. I don't know if it's a state school or.
So they're, I guess, they're colleagues basically.
Okay.
And he's really interesting. If you're into Jungian. He's like almost like a Ken Wilber, like theory of everything kind of guy. He really, I think that he has done Zen or Dzogchen or Zen, or maybe both, for like 30 years or something like that. He's like Jordan Peterson if he was more Eastern leaning.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because Peterson kind of has a theory of everythingness to him too. But I would say more through Western.
It's very,
lens.
very clearly tilted toward the Western.
Yeah.
Gets with integrating Freud and Jung. It would be a major place for Peterson to hang out. I've never heard him say, "Now let's bring in the Buddha."
Yeah.
Let's bring in anatta, self.
He's mentioned the Buddha a couple of times, but it's very much like let's compare the Buddha story to like this Western story.
I've often found people who have that awareness a little bit like Will Durant, the historian who wrote that 12-volume series of world history, world philosophy, history of philosophy, and his apprehension of Buddha was, and Buddha represents the extinguishing of desire. And when I first heard that, I thought, what does that even mean, the extinguishing of desire?
Something you're doing.
And it's a very casual approach to Buddha to say that extinguishing of desire. It's there's truth to it, but it's a far more complex.
Simplification.
It's a great simple, and it's often people who are trying to give Buddha a place in their Western-centric model will say that Buddha represented the extinguishing of desire, but even that's not a place you want to hang out. Yeah. Well, what do you mean by that? I mean, first of all, one of the things I've recently discovered about Buddhism is that, in fact, it's similar to Christianity. Nothing was written down in Buddhism for 500 years. Yeah, exactly. So when people say the Buddha taught, you just have to take that as apocryphal and accurate. The Buddha didn't, what the Buddha taught is there's a vast body of stuff in Buddhism. So people say Buddhism says, I don't know that Buddhism says, but it's good enough to have the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And the Buddha is a metaphor.
It really is. It's a monolith, but he's not the practices that are there are many practices that have fallen under the umbrella of Buddhism and worldviews, including that which most interests me at this point, or which got my attention and brought me to this conversation, basically, is the Dzogchen tradition, which essentially means the great perfection, and it is that school which to Buddhism is like Advaita is to the Vedanta or Hindu tradition, namely the completion. And namely, it's the completion in the sense that, look, folks, here's what it's all about. Namely, You can continue to be devotional toward the deities if you want. You can have a guru if you want. You can do the sutras, and you can bow in the prostrations 100,000 times, or you can pay attention to these basic clues, pointing out experiences for being an awake person. It's the tradition of Dzogchen, the pointing out experiences of the Tibetans. Same with Advaita, were considered the culmination. At a time, you would really have to travel to the Himalayas, and you wouldn't even be given a conversation around those until you were considered prepared. And the preparation was essentially sitting in the, bringing water, chopping wood and carrying water and being a staff person.
Very more Zen approach, right? Of like, just do it,
Well, the difference is Zen would say you do that, and that's also about awakening. But in the lineage traditions, Zen is a lineage tradition too. But there is a sense of we'll introduce you at some point to the direct waking up experiences, but you're not considered ready now. Because generally turns out to be because you really need to be a personal assistant to the Rinpoche for another 5 years.
Because he needs somebody to chop his wood.
He needs somebody to chop wood for his particular stove. So where we're living now in this great period of global convergence is those waking up or pointing out instructions of Advaita as well as Advaita Vedanta or Dzogchen Buddhism are no longer accessible only by getting on a plane and going and finding. They're here right now.
YouTube. I feel so lucky to live in the time we live right now. I really do. Yeah. I didn't mean to steal your
No, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And one of in the radical non-dual view, it's sort of like, well, don't you have to do years of meditation to stabilize your awareness? And the response of those, let's call it the direct path.
Yes.
There's Dzogchen, there's Advaita, but they're both considered two traditions in what is broadly now being called the direct path or the direct approach, versus the gradual or progressive approach. And the argument, and it's ultimately the distinction doesn't hold a lot of water, but
it can be helpful to explore it, I think, even if ultimately it's kind of a whole lot of nothing, but it can be helpful because it can show maybe ways in your own mind that you're thinking it's gonna be right, that I'm gonna reach realization at some point down the road, like as Paul would say, it's gonna take 1,000 lifetimes, but keep working at it, you'll get it. So exploring the difference between that and maybe I already am awake now, maybe that exploring those two things can be helpful, I think.
Yes.
The dichotomies.
And there is an argument to be, for example, when I was doing Vipassana meditation and doing retreats, without really thinking through in a way that I have since, like what exactly are my operating premises here around doing these retreats? And for example, there's a lot of talk in the contemporary Vipassana world about cultivating the factors of mindfulness, cultivating the factors of enlightenment, and qualities like diligence, and even down to your posture, getting your posture just right, and so on and so on and so on. And those who came later in the great culmination, the great perfection path, say their realization was the factors of enlightenment came installed with the package. The factors of mindfulness don't have to be cultivated. Rest as awareness. You're not trying to find awareness. You're using a modicum of attention to find what is already present if you will rest in that.
Yes.
And that metaphor in the Tibetan tradition, rest as awareness. They don't say rest in awareness or even rest as if you are awareness. Rest as the awareness, the nature, your original nature, which is who you are right now. Rest as that. And then it is in that place that a skilled teacher might say, are you awake? Are you aware? And you'll say, yes. That's one thing, as you know, Sam Harris will often say, the one thing we can't question, whatever consciousness is, that we are conscious is indubitable. Even if it is artificial intelligence and this is just a simulation. So in that resting as awareness, a skilled teacher would say, are you aware? Are you awake? Are you aware right now? And it's, minimally, as Paul says, if you're not two steps lower than a coconut, you'll say, yeah, I'm aware. And he'll say, who's this I? And then he'll put his, maybe his hands to his lip and say, I don't want an answer.
Yes.
Sit with that. Who is I? When you say I am aware, who or what is that I?
Yes.
And it is in that place that there can be a real direct awakening. One thing that those teachers will often say is, I can tell you're awake already, and you're always already awake. And you can say, oh, good, there's nothing to be done with that. And you can just go on your way. That will be called a shallow awakening. So there is something to be said for sitting, when a teacher says, who is the I that says I am awake? Don't answer that right now. Sit with it. Because the deeper you, quote, sit with it, you increase the likelihood that you'll have a direct apprehension of this. There is no I in here. So right now I'm pointing to me, just so the listener knows. I'm pointing to me.
For most people, it's probably here. Like
okay,
between the eyes,
but I mean just over here in this direction to the
yeah.
action, or as Suzanne Siegel called it, the circuitry.
Yeah.
After she had her big awakening experience. So I'm pointing to me saying, I'm here and you're there. Yeah. So when you have the recognition that is an absolutely arbitrary divide, that there may be just one thing happening, and it's more than a shallow awareness of that. That one thing happening is something that is recognizable because you're resting as the awareness that you already have never not been.
That's it.
And then, there's an interesting tradition or a technique in that I'm going to share this with you. It's a technique, it's a method for people who have had that sense of anatta, no self, an experience of that. A good teacher
that have had the sense of no self.
Yes. Yeah. Well, a good teacher will say, okay, now I want you to, having done that, sit here with me. I want you to remember the last time you were really embarrassed. I want you to remember the last time you were really ashamed.
Yeah.
In other words, he's attempting to call forth those experiences of personal, to having taken it personally. You've just had an experience of no self. Yeah. Now, identify with this self again. Identify with this body. The feelings are yours. The thoughts are yours. Yes. Now, notice how you feel. Now, once again, notice that you have thoughts, but you're not those. Now bring it back out again to no self. So, the phrase I never heard described.
Seeing that movement.
The movement, you know what I call it? And I don't know if I've invented this term, and it's not even a fancy term. I call it psychic mobility. Namely, what we have as human beings.
Moving in that space.
Yeah, we have the ability, sometimes saying, I am Keith.
Psychic mobility, dude, you're killing it. I love it. That's going to become a part of my vernacular.
Yeah, maybe so.
And I got to say, as Keith says.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so quote me from Hannah. Because it doesn't mean that we don't no longer have the way a teacher that I like named Jackson Peterson, who's doing a lot of original thinking right now in a post-Dzogchen world. He's very kind of a radical around, look, it's always already here. He says, think of it as a phantom limb. Once you've realized you're not that anymore, now you're not just this body and this body-mind, that's been a convention of self-description that has become normal. And when you've had an experience that goes beyond that, it's like it becomes a phantom limb. You don't ever lose that place. It's a little bit like your awareness that there's no Santa Claus.
Yes,
there's no
that's
empty
the metaphor
space.
That came to me when I first had my first non-dual experience was once you know there's no Santa Claus, you can't go back to believing there's a Santa Claus.
And you also don't have an empty space called no Santa.
No, exactly.
That you relate to for the rest of your life. And as a matter of fact, you continue to celebrate that holiday in December, whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah, and there's still gifts given. And your children probably got introduced. My son got introduced to Santa Claus, and he's also come. So the gifts giving continues. It's no longer a belief that anybody comes down the chimney. But you don't have this empty space called, of the awareness or the presence of the absence of as a self. That brings us around again to Paul Hederman's idea.
So what you were saying, I thought made me think of Paul, the horses in front of the cart, which is another freaking A+ metaphor.
Yes,
right?
It is.
And once you see that the horse is in front of the cart, the horse has always been in front of the cart.
It's never not been in front of the cart.
Be in front of the cart. It only ever seemed that the cart was in front of the horse, and you were so convinced the cart was in front of the horse. That was only ever just a illusion. The horse, and you basically can't ever unsee that the horse is in front of the cart once it's truly been seen. And that, as you were saying, that of bringing up the Santa Claus, bringing up the phantom limb, once you see that which is really directing this, and you see it as not you or what you identify as you, then it's sort of, it is there. and you can't. This brings me back to John Vervaeke. That's perfect, because I never got to quite finish it. So John Vervaeke, in his The Meaning Crisis, which I highly recommend, he talks about how we cannot lie to ourselves, right? And a lot of people go, well, we can, but he says we can bullshit ourselves. So here's the distinction. Isn't that cool? So I used to say, I don't know if I was the first person to say this either, but I'm a slave to my rationality. That once you, so if you know there's no Santa Claus, you can't make yourself then go back to believing that there's a Santa Claus that literally comes down the chimney and blah, blah, blah. Once you know that 2 + 2 is 4, you cannot force yourself to believe it's anything else but 4, right? So that's saying that you can't lie to yourself. And we really cognitively can't. But we can bullshit ourselves, which is taking your interest and attention and directing it in such a way to get the result that you really want. So alcoholism would be a great example of, okay, I can't lie to myself I know that in the past, the last 100 times that I started drinking, I ended up in a jail cell or passed out on someone's lawn or whatever. But I can bullshit myself, which is finding, and this is what I'm very much into cults, given my past and con artists and stuff. This is what con artists do. We're conning ourselves by saying a truth, right? Pick your truth. I deserve this because I've been working really hard. And,
yes.
Well, I've been good all this time. Let me try and see if maybe I can only have 1 drink this time. We're bullshitting ourselves, right? And
this time it'll be different.
Yeah, and we're all doing this all day.
With some substance.
With some addiction, whether it's television, whether it's whatever. Take your pick, right? And so I love that distinction that he goes into of you can't lie to yourself, but you can bullshit yourself. And that's basically like what the mental state is kind of doing all day, every day, is bullshitting itself. We know it's not true, but there's just this sense of like, really, the body, the chemical, hormonal thing that is the body has its drives. It wants to eat, it wants safety, it wants to do as little work as possible, it wants to rest. And so those drives are going to continually be rationalized by the bullshitting part of yourself to come in and be like, yeah, we don't need to exercise today, or you deserve that cookie, or you whatever, right? And just once the only chance you really have is not to use that system to then somehow all of a sudden stop drinking, start eating right, but to see the system itself, see that activity as, oh, I'm bullshit. The mental state is bullshitting itself. It's trying to convince itself of something. That's the best hope you have, because once you see it for what it is, you see it as not you.
And you will not see it from the level of it.
Yeah, of being identified with it.
Yeah. It is whether you want to use a vertical, 1 step up, it is the larger, or
something outside of it.
Concentric circles, maybe being inside it. There has to be a larger circle, and the awareness has to expand. And as Paul has often pointed out, that you can't use self to get out of self as a self. This is where I find the resonance between the recovery world and the spiritual world. The recognition where AA works and the recovery, the 12-step programs work, and parallel program is by recognition. Sometimes it is said, alcoholism or addiction is a spiritual disease. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with that, and I think Paul doesn't either. He said, no, it's a mental disease.
Yes.
It's a spiritual solution, and it is only from the spiritual solution, which you could define as, if the word spiritual causes some people, I don't like the term spiritual because it's too much like religion, then just call it the next orbit out beyond mind.
Yes.
Some ability, some perspective, so that you're outside of self.
Yeah.
And that's why the genius of the first 3 steps. Very often, a power greater than self. Self, that's
I know.
A power greater than self, meaning the self-centered self that thinks it's an ego.
Exactly.
I agree with Paul that one of the, I wouldn't call it a drawback because it's a great program, but one of the things that doesn't get thought through enough in AA is when you realize you're not the self, who is realizing that? Namely, self-centeredness. There is a place beyond self-centeredness. And yet the next step that people in recovery often go through is to say, okay, now create a list of my resentments. But wait a minute. They were the resentments that you develop of self-centeredness. Now you're going back and reclaiming it. So there is an invitation in the 12 steps, which Paul represents. Let me just say this. This is what I think Paul's genius is, of coming in and through the 12-step movement as continually holding ground for the awareness that, why don't we take this all the way out, folks?
Yes.
If it was self-centeredness that got you into trouble, don't use self-centeredness to claim responsibility for your harms. They were the harms of self-centeredness. And it is only because you're no longer in this. And what does it mean not to be in it? It means maybe there is no action figure, or that's not who you are either.
Exactly.
But in truth, most people in recovery, and I say this with great respect, are simply trying not to drink.
Yeah.
They are not looking for an awareness program that takes them beyond the personal self.
Yeah.
And it's a pathway to that.
And I think
But
you're
it's not
right
going to-
that there is such a huge invitation in that. That's why I think, so I searched, I came to Paul after a couple of different non-dual teachers, right? I was very much into Muji. This guy who I actually met with, who I got a whole lot of insight out of, Michael Rodriguez. Is a smaller. He's friends with Adi Shanti, like in that group. I really like Adi Shanti, but when I came to Paul, this is gonna sound maybe sort of surface or whatever, but I was like, this dude has been through some shit. Like the action figure has been to the brink, and to me, there's some sort of credibility in that of like, okay, I get I'm not hating on Adi Shanti, but hey, you're a middle class Silicon Valley comfortable guy.
You got to do Zen in your dad's garage.
Yeah, which and of course, and that doesn't, again, just the way that the actions that Paul did don't actually affect the message. The actions that he did don't actually affect the message. But for me, from where I was at, I go, if this dude has been through what he's been through, he's been to the brink of everything, right? And he's still here standing, and he can still confidently give this message. Like, oh God, I again almost cried at a talk. I think it was not Saturday, but the one before, when he's talking about his surgery, and he said that feeling came over him when he was sitting there and they're working on his leg, and he goes, no matter what I've been through, it was all worth it for this moment. And to me, it's like,
I remember that. I was at the same talk. It was at Sausalito.
Yes. He goes, no matter what chaos I was through, it was all worth it for this. And that you can have anytime. You can have it right now. All the crazy shit, no matter what you've been through, it was all worth it because right here, I'm okay. I'm getting chills.
And as he often points out, and has pointed out in numerous traditions, it's just part and parcel of, but you've got to realize it for yourself rather than read it in a book, which is that it is never not okay.
Yes.
It was never not. So the coming home, you never left home, which is that quote Paul has been, but that's, that sounds great. You go on a path and you realize that you never left and it was always right here. It's the Wizard of Oz. It's, let's cue the violins. Alice in Wonderland. The Wizard of Oz is a very good child's version of it.
We've been watching it a lot lately.
It's such a great sign. And somebody once said, it's a bastardized fairy tale. I said, what are you talking about? Fairy tales are bastardized. They're told by the folk.
Yeah, exactly.
They're told out in the villages.
Yeah.
And long before Jung found out about them and found out that they were connected with archetypes. People live the archetypes. But anyway,
that's why it all those stories connected so well.
There's
because
that one,
it was told by the people.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
They come from the people, from the Volk.
Yes.
The Volk. So did Hitler, by the way. I mean, he appealed to the Volk. So the Volk is not anything to do casual folklore with. There are dark.
It's a tool that can be very dangerous.
In the collective, okay?
Absolutely.
Hitler was a genius, and I don't want to go down the Hitler road here, but Hitler was a genius at working the collective energies of resentment. But there are the collective energies of transcendence and the recognition. So that one quote that's from Zen, one of the Zen paths, going to the other shore, arriving at the other shore on having never left. It is that reckoning, going, all the practices, all the meditation, all the rowing, the sitting up late at the retreat, going to see another teacher. Can I drive to San Jose to see so-and-so? What a great teacher, blah, blah, blah.
All this work.
All of the practices and all of the methods and all of the self-denials and so forth. Going, arriving at the other shore, on never having left and realizing you never left. You were always, and it's just that.
Yeah.
And the only response is speechlessness to that. It's just now we just sit for 5 minutes in total silence.
And if you look at it as an equation, the only way that the arriving could really bring the peace and the recognition that it does would be if you had never left.
If you'd never
right?
having never left.
Yes.
And Paul talks a lot about it. This to me was a major connection point when he says the mental process, what he called the mental process, which is a term for mind, small mind. You know, the term mind is problematic in all this stuff.
It could
small
stand
mind, because there's big mind, and that's actually who you really are, and the small mind is who you really aren't. But
this
calls
is
it the
probably
mental
not as skillful, but sometimes I say imagination in place of that. But there are connotations to that too. But that you could say like the imagination of God. That's one I really like too. But then you're adding more and more connotations. But big mind.
So when he calls it the mental process, he says the funny thing about the mental process, it wants to find being. It wants to look for being. It says it wants to be. It does not want to find being. It wants to look for being. Because here's the thing that I bear in mind when I find myself being agitated, stirred up, not at peace, incomplete, is that sense of that mental process is restlessness. It is restlessness. It claims to want to find being. If it finds being, it will. If you find being, if you get an out, and you find yourself sitting in what you always are and what you have never not been, that thought process immediately comes in through selfing and says, I found it, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
But then it wants to go back to elaborate it further or search for something.
There's got to be something more.
There must be something more. There must be something more.
Yeah.
It is restlessness. And in the AA world, Alcoholics Anonymous, 12 steps, it is restlessness, irritation, and discontent.
I know, it's such a beautiful way of saying it.
And you can stop drinking.
That's dukkha to me.
It is dukkha. Yeah. It is.
That says it in English as plain as possible.
And that's where this other recovery plan called Refuge Recovery, which is it's a I'm not here to refugerecovery.com or .org, I forget which. But it is a major alternative to the 12 steps for those who find the 12 steps too theistic, too Christian. You find a higher power outside of yourself, and so forth. Many people turn to Refuge Recovery not because they're particularly Buddhist, but because they're secular. They don't want that kind of language. And so the idea is that we have within ourselves the potential to be free of addiction. So in any case, yes, they start with the idea that I think 12 Steps doesn't fully develop. It's that alcoholism is the problem. Actually, it's a deeper problem. It's the human addictiveness that's the problem, because it's alcohol, drugs, shopping, sex, work. You go on vacation to Hawaii after thinking, I can't wait to get to Hawaii, and then you get to Hawaii and you're thinking about all the stuff that you're having been doing at home. You're not enjoying Hawaii and you didn't enjoy home. That's a sign that it's not about Hawaii and it's not about home. It's about your restlessness with your dukkha. That sense of unsatisfactoriness is what the Buddhists...
Fundamental unsatisfactoriness.
Just a sense of something fundamentally unsatisfactory to the moment, which is the first noble truth.
Yes.
It's a second. There is suffering, and the source of suffering is that of wanting something to be other than the way it is.
Yes.
Bingo. Or wanting this to stay the way it is.
Yes.
Bingo.
Yes. Once time gets injected into the equation. Because we are here, we know that much. Like going back to Sam, there's conscious awareness in this moment. We're here. The suffering comes when we say, "I want it to be different than what it is," or "I want it to stay like this." Both injecting time into, this moment, all that there is. Yeah. I just gotta say, I really do appreciate your streams of consciousness. It's been really good.
Likewise.
I'm looking forward to listening back to this. I'm not saying this is the end. I'm just saying that popped up for me, and I'm like, man. And the other thing that has hit me is you have a good radio voice. Has anyone ever told you that?
I have been told that.
Yeah,
I have been told.
I'm actually for the podcast.
I'm actually. I won't say my town, not that I have any, but I call in talk radio shows a lot. It's one of my favorite things to do.
I could hear your voice on the radio.
And
I don't have a good radio voice. I have like high pitch, you know. So that's why I really appreciate.
Oh well, thank you.
Naturally happens.
Well, and I enjoy doing it. I enjoy calling into talk radio because it's a great practice for me. Talk radio thrives on the topic of the day or the topic of the hour.
Yeah.
And for today, no doubt it'll be Trump's most recent tweet over the weekend.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what that Trump is or that tweet is because it's going to be history by the time. But it's currently the time. So that's what's discussed today. And I just sort of listened to it for a few minutes, and I just call the number in San Francisco, KGO, and I found that I can very easily get on. And the interesting, I had this came from a conversation with one of the hosts, and she said, "Keith, before you begin, I want to say how good it is to hear from you again." And I said, "Well, thank you." She goes, "You're a regular caller here, as you know, and when I see that you're on the board, I've come to expect that even though I may disagree with you, that you will be respectful and you'll put your view out." And I said, "Well, thank you, Pat." That's the host's name. I don't know why I'm saying it, except it's a practice for me because I'll often sit there and say, "Okay, I've got an opinion, and I'm gonna," and I don't kind of give into it. Like I don't call from an adversarial standpoint. I call to say, how could I clarify this conversation a little bit? What could I add that might clarify?
Be a lot more helpful than just going
truly,
in.
because the confirmation bias is so prevalent now. Here's my belief. Here's my view of the way things are, and I'm going to confirm it by the following evidence. Well, guess what? I've just selected very carefully for the evidence so that it fits the preconceived notion.
Everyone, the way that I say it is, everyone's lawyers for an ideology now. Everyone, there is an ideology. I really like. It's actually a Jordan Peterson thing. Is that you don't have ideas; ideas have you.
It's most often the case.
Really, and you start hearing, and you can almost see the like AI algorithm of two people arguing when you got the extreme, right, and the extreme left. You just go, okay, now they're going to respond like this, and then they're going to respond like that, because it's not them. They are the mouthpieces for an ideology, and it's so clear. And that's why when you come across those people who you're like, oh, maybe if there is an ideology, there's a diversity of ideologies, and you see that maybe they're able to see us like the intellectual dark web. If you hear a Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson, there is an ideology there. There is a certain, but it seems much deeper and maybe more. Like I said, just a diversity.
Well, let me say that. Let's shift from Paul Hederman to Sam Harris.
My other favorite.
One
guy.
thing I've come to really value with Sam Harris, and I think it's probably due to his long-term contemplative practice,
I think it absolutely
where you just
is.
learn to sit and notice the rising of that, the breath, the thought, the feeling, and come back to the moment, and come back to the moment, come back to just sitting here. Shikantaza, as they say in Zen, just sitting.
Joe Rogan calls him an intellectual black belt, which I really like.
Black belt?
An intellectual black belt, Sam Harris. That he has he's a master at it. He can sit in it. He doesn't panic, right? The way that maybe a newer lower belt starts freaking out and starts expending energy. He just stays in his pocket and just. So
he would actually be a great. I mean, he's got his. Well, he is because he'd be a great talk radio host. But he is one.
Yeah.
He's a podcaster.
That's the modern.
That's
radio,
his. It's the extension and broadening of the broadcast medium, the AM talk radio. But Sam Harris, one thing I really like is he will make clear in any given conversation. For example, one that I really find him useful on, he'll say, look, I am a liberal.
Yeah.
I am on the left on the following issues. I am reliably a progressive, if you would define it as the following. I think there should be tighter restrictions on guns. I think the rich ought to be paying higher taxes. I think that's, and he goes down the line.
He doesn't leave any
Global
ambiguity.
warming is happening, and it appears that humans play a significant role, he'll say.
Yeah.
Then he'll say, and then I find, however, on my side, progressives who are clamping down on freedom of speech, who are clamping down on freedom of expression, who are prohibiting freedom of assembly. And I say, guys, what's going on? So then people say, oh, you've had to turn to the right. No, I'm not on the right. And so he's basically what he's doing there is saying, look, I'm on the left, predictably on many issues. And when I criticize my own side, doesn't mean I've gone to the right. He said, there's the left-right binary thing.
Yes.
And what I'm doing, he don't say this.
Us.
He won't say this, but he'll say, let's just draw a circle around that left-right binary. Make that the subject. I don't go to the right when I criticize my own side on the left. And there are people on the right who are that way too. They'll say, look, I'm on the right on the following. I lower taxes, smaller government, individual responsibility, get over collective guilt, etc. And they're also willing to criticize their own side.
I would say like Ben Shapiro was maybe an example of that on the right side. Yeah, I haven't listened to a whole lot of him, but he has a very much like he in the Sam Harris way is like, this is how I feel about this. This is how I feel about that. And I know the majority of people on the right maybe feel this way. I disagree.
Yes.
You know, and that's really so refreshing to hear.
Well, he gave a good example of that just the other day. He and was criticized on the right, which here's what they say about Sam. So here's what he did. There was just this White House summit on social media.
Yes.
And about the fact that it appears,
Facebook,
politely speaking, that both Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google have all been doing some, censoring.
Yeah.
Okay, they're deplatforming, demonetizing people, and they claim it's just the algorithm. Well, it's a little suspicious, but in any case, so Trump has a summit, social media summit, and he invites a lot of really good people. I track that field pretty carefully. I'm pretty much of a free speech absolutist, with some exceptions.
Yeah, me too. Almost.
So
I'm
it just
very
come down.
far on the side.
I'm pretty much on the side of
to say it all.
the best antidote to bad speech is more speech.
Yes.
Not canceling the guy who just said that. Shame him.
Yes.
Speak out against him.
And let
but
the
do
fools
not
expose
use tear
themselves.
gas. Do not use mustard gas, and do not club, as a guy in Portland, Andy Ngo was just beaten up. So. Anyway, Trump had a pretty mixed crowd there. He brought some people who were over on the conspiracy theory side of stuff. And so Ben Shapiro on his Friday show said it was great. Yeah, great to see this summit, social media. He had that kind of high nasal voice of him. Yeah. Great to see this social media summit, but I want to know what the White House is having known conspiracy theorists and representing them as conservatives. Anyway, basically, I won't do his voice much more, but he says, they're not conservative. They're not anyone, if you're a conservative, they're not anyone you should be proud to associate with. I won't even name who he named. But he was simply saying, as a conservative, I don't want to traffic with some of these people. So again, it's that same...
Instead of being tribal, as far as...
All
these people are on my team, so I have to defend them to the end. Getting back to the ideology, I'm a lawyer for this ideology, which is the right. There's a lot of ambiguity there.
Yes.
What is the right? Instead of like, no, this is how I feel. And if you happen to, say that you're on my tribe, I'm going to say, well...
Then I'm not in your tribe.
I'm not in your tribe, exactly.
And it's that whole classic...
That's so helpful if more people would do that instead of be committed to... I know there's an instinct, there's a biological instinct to like, I need to have people that I can band with so that I can stay safe. That's like going back to like tribalism. If you're kicked out of the tribe, that means death.
Oh.
That's why public shaming is so it can completely destroy you.
It will be then. You'll be eaten by animals because no one's going to save you.
Exactly. And so us bringing this into modern day, it's like you eat a piece of chocolate and you go, oh man, I'm going to just keep eating chocolate all the time because it tastes great. It was harder for you to find anything sweet back when you were, in the tribal life. Now, we're safe. It's okay to have your own opinion. You don't need to completely defend and prescribe to a tribe, and it's just, I think we're slowly waking up from that.
Well, and speaking of sources we could recommend, I haven't actually read the book myself, but I've certainly read lots of excerpts, and I love both authors. The Coddling of the American Mind.
Yes.
By Jonathan Haidt
Haidt.
And Greg Lubiansky, or some such similar last name.
So good.
It is so
if you
important.
have kids. If you have preteen to teenager kids, read the freaking book.
Because what we've got going on now, well, I don't want to get too much into a side thing, but we've got students on college campuses who've been so wonderfully protected and well helicopter parented. So that disputes that would have taken place on the playground in a previous, and they would have been allowed to resolve themselves. No, not in beatings, but in maybe some uncomfortable negotiations about
like human interaction.
Human interactions. You learn to negotiate and set the boundaries.
Years,
And what's happening is the assistant principal and the recess monitor come in and put both in the office, and they have a negotiation agreement and a stand down agreement. In any case, so young people have come to. This is the first generation that's come to college college campuses without really exposure to alternative viewpoints, because mom and dad stepped in all the time to make sure that you stayed with your own tribe. So to me, the larger issue here, beyond just the college campuses, although that's one place it's acting out with the safe spaces and trigger warnings, the larger issue is the human brain hasn't changed much for 100,000 years. So what do we have in the last 20 years alone is this experiment in social media that does nothing but exacerbate tribalism, as if we had somehow transcended it. No, we haven't. All it does, and remember when the internet, the promise was the great global community is here. All viewpoints will be represented. Spaceship Earth has a communications medium now.
And everyone will understand each other.
Yes, because of the sheer... Well,
I don't remember where I heard it, but they say we have ancient hardware with modern software and cultural software too. Technological software would really be a better way to say it.
And one of the great ironies is the very movement, particularly on the left with progressives, that would say, the bumper stickers we would see, celebrate diversity. Yeah. Multiculturalism is good. Well, essentially what they're saying is we've had a very short intensive course in diversity and multiculturalism. We have brought people together who have not normally been together in close and face to face, nose to nose. And we're wondering why there are disputes. There are border skirmishes breaking out. That's why I think it's interesting. One of to shift into politics, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I like to say that to show that I can say it. Buttigieg.
That's pretty good.
Is his being gay going to be is it going to be a factor?
Yeah.
And what's interesting, the polls so far seem to indicate that among Democrats are saying it's not a factor for me, but then they say, but I believe it's going to be a factor for others.
Exactly.
And it doesn't take a great analyst of polls to say that is a displacement going on.
Absolutely.
And it means that I would guess, I don't want to shift into politics, just from wearing a pundit hat, having no dog in any of the presidential stuff right now, but just being a pundit, I would say, unless I'm misreading, I think where we are with Buttigieg will be a frontier figure. He's the first presidential candidate who happens to be gay.
Openly gay, yeah.
But openly gay. He will not be successful, but he will advance the conversation.
Yeah.
He will advance the conversation.
And when you look back over the great arc of history, that's normally what it is.
In my view, the conversation around same-sex stuff has advanced pretty much this far. Even among many who might continue to say they are morally opposed, but they love the sinner, but they hate the sin.
Yeah.
So let's say Christians and others who might be morally opposed would also have to say that they've got a nephew.
Of course.
Or a niece.
Everyone does.
Or a neighbor.
Yes.
So that they've come to live and let live. And while they themselves would never, might not go to a gay marriage or a same-sex marriage, maybe they would, but they would still maybe hold on to that place in them that says, well, I don't support this, but that's my nephew, and I'm going to give him a gift for his wedding present, or give her my lesbian niece. So I think that's where we are right now. I think there's a libertarian acceptance of same-sex, and for many there is no other issue.
Yeah.
And for some around maybe the cultural conservatives, there is. So what I think probably is going to happen with Buttigieg, even though he's brilliant on many things and he speaks 8 languages and he looks like an ad for Mr. and Mrs. He and his husband look like a conventional mainstream American. I'm guessing that that issue is probably a negative.
Yeah.
For him.
I know, which sucks.
The same
it is where it is.
In the same sense that for Barack Obama was a breakthrough on race. That until there was Obama, I didn't think the country was ready, frankly.
Yeah, well, I think I said this before. Maybe it was even on a podcast I recorded back years ago. That if you go back to 1999, yourself in 1999, 20 years ago, right? And you say, over the next 20 years, we're going to have a black president. Donald Trump's going to be president. Weed's going to be legal in many, many states. Like, you're going to be able to go to the store and buy it. People are going to be able, same-sex couples are going to be able to marry ever. You really probably wouldn't believe on any of those fronts, right? So there are things where you're like, well, for sure, there's some things. The great examples like flying cars in the 80s. We thought we'd have flying cars by now, right? So there's some things that we missed the mark on, but we underestimate culture in a lot of things, you know what I mean?
We do.
And so you never know what that quantum leap, where it's going to come from, where everyone's so convinced, same sex. I mean, people, I don't even know the timeline, but I think we were as a culture, the story in like 2006 was like same-sex marriage maybe in 30 years, and then it was like 3 years or something like that. It was like 2010, somewhere around there. But yeah, you know, so there are quantum leaps that happen, and you just never quite know when that's going to come along.
And do you know what's the funny thing about the phrase? This reminds me of the phrase "quantum leap" was pointed out by some social observer. He said, actually, the metaphor "quantum leap" is a fun one, because it implies the big leap that we don't expect, a big quantum leap. Yeah. He says, actually in quantum mechanics, a quantum leap is a very small, very small. So I don't know exactly how you use the phrase quantum leap, but his point was it is not a sudden and unexpected large leap. But the point is, yes, quantum leap does refer to these large leaps that couldn't be predictable.
Yeah, in my mind,
but it's a good metaphor.
I've always thought of quantum leap as like you're here, and then all of a sudden you're there.
Are we there?
You're on the complete other side that you never
And there
imagined.
are many factors that bear into it. I mean, when Barack Obama announced his candidacy against Hillary Clinton, 2008, I said, not a chance. He's probably positioning himself to get some attention so that 2012 or 2016.
Most people thought that probably, yeah.
Yes, and do you know one of the main factors that turned out to be to his benefit? He essentially offered Shelby Steele, another scholar that I would recommend, is an African-American conservative at the Hoover Institute, veteran of the civil rights movement, but came out of it with a strong commitment to Martin Luther King's emphasis on individual character and individuality and getting away from groupthink, including the groupthink of what he saw as the civil rights movement. And Shelby Steele has pointed out that Obama was a personality type, a master negotiator. And as a negotiator, particularly because he's half black and half white, he was the first African American who could come to America and say, look, my mother's white. He didn't say it quite this way. But according to Steele, he basically said, look, you white America have been harangued for a long time by the Jesse Jacksons and the Al Sharptons. You're tired of being made to feel guilty. I get that. Guess what? I'm not going to make you feel guilty. I'm not going to play the race card. And white America, again, this is a very capsulized account on the part of Shelby Steele. And white America, says Shelby Steele, said, say what? You're basically saying we get a pass? You're not going to hold me guilty for my grandfather, which exactly is that way it should not be held. You are not guilty for what your grandfather, or including your great-great-grandfather who may have been a slaveholder. You have this is what, and so
he used
Obama said yes.
He
said yes, I am saying that. And so a lot of moderate and even conservatives, well, I'm going to vote for Obama because I actually, remember, it also then played into what he called white guilt. He says, you get to feel an absolution. And when someone like Obama was willing to offer you absolution...
all you got to do is write Barack Obama or check his name, and you're good.
And now I'm
not
free.
Racist.
So you haven't heard a racist thing from my mouth ever. Well, and I'm not going to take... So I'm home.
Absolution.
And so, absolution. Shelby Steele it was a very wise and that psychological analysis of what was going on. So my point was, well then, we couldn't have expected Obama because we would have thought a black candidate would have been far more controversial around the race issue. But in fact, it was a relatively small issue. Sure, there were white supremacists who said blah 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 about we don't want one of them in the White House. But in fact, Obama's the greater concerns about Obama among conservatives were his leftism, his Marxism, his communist mentor, whatever his name was, and so not so much he was black. And I think it probably was because he had that white mother. And in our knowledge, he looks very black, but we knew that he was not here to fight those battles. He was more of a world-centric figure rather than a socio-centric. He said, look, I'm not going to... And the analogy is good. Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton are racial provocateurs, just as David Duke is on the other side.
Exactly.
So, and Obama, of course, he hung out with Jesse Jackson, and he hung out with Al Sharpton, but he basically introduced himself, I'm not in that tribe. I'm in a let's try to bring stuff together tribe. And I still want more government activity than you conservatives do. Okay, let's fight it on that basis. But let's not. In other words, he was able to neutralize the racial issue alone. I don't think Buttigieg will probably be successful with that.
Yeah, and there's a whole different dynamic of our history with race in this country.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like that's a different. if we're in a poker game, Barack Obama's playing different chips than
That's
than Buttigieg
exactly
might
right.
have,
There
you know
is
what
a
I mean?
historic. I mean, our founding documents had some bad that took a lot of revision. Thank God we have a system that has constitutional amendments.
Exactly.
That the Constitution can still be sacrosanct because you can amend it.
Yeah.
And therefore, it still is sacred.
They didn't have it all figured out in 1776.
Yeah, and even the great I'm of the mind that Jefferson, nothing he wrote or said should be marginalized based on the fact that he didn't live up to it. Don't we all fall short of what we can?
Of course,
That we can. And
if
so
we could only write what we actually have done in
That
our
have
lives, in
lived.
the comes to our life,
we hold these truths to be self-evident most of the time, except on Tuesday and Wednesday. And all men are created equal except my slaves, who are actually my property.
Yeah.
No, he was
Yeah.
the genius of that recognition.
That's
You can espouse universal truths. And then many, in a sense, this brings us around to the beginning. You can have a recognition of non-duality. You can have a recognition of the oneness, the suchness, the unspeakable unity of all existence with all its moving parts. Right now I see cars going up the street and I'm waving my right arm and left arm. There's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
And it may be all one thing, and an hour from now I may be driving home and I'll be angry at the driver in front of me, and I'll be totally identified with Keith again. This body, my right to get out of this lane right now, and I'll move between those two.
Yes.
Between...
And that is like a little spiritual practice in itself, is to see it from all the different angles, and at the moment be lucid within the dreaming of like, oh, look at that, I was identified as the dreamt. I was identified as the dream character in that. You know what I'm saying? So yesterday, it's funny you bring up yelling at drivers. 2 days ago, I was really high, and I was leaving Costco, and I'm pushing my cart, and I was just feeling good. Just had my headphones in, listening to music, pushing my cart, and there's a little 2-lane place. So I'm as far over to the right as I can be, basically, pushing my cart. And a guy comes up in like an SUV, and he speeds up and goes around me. And he had his family in the car with him, and he yells out the window, "Get out of the way!" Right, as he's driving by. And it hit me. This is a stoner thought, but I think you're going to hang with me on this. I go, "Get out of the way." He didn't say get out of my way. He said get out of
the way.
His whole...
There's one way.
That's self-centeredness. His whole world is...
the way. You're in the way. You're in the way. There's only one way. You're in it, and which is defined by you're preventing me from getting to where I need to go.
And I was thinking, yeah. And it hit me of like, oh, everyone is living in that. And so he then stopped at the stop sign, and I was pushing, and he was in my way, seemingly. I looked at him in the eyes, and I just started laughing, and he looked kind of pissed, but it was a complete stoner thought of like I was in the way. It's very like almost Zen too, right? You know, another Zen story I remember is two Zen, I think a master and a student are walking, and a bunch of geese fly by in a really beautiful formation, and they fly and they fly and they disappear. And the student goes to the master. He goes, "Oh man, the geese left. They went away." And the master hits him on the head with a stick, and he goes, "Where could they have left to?" Similar of like, yes.
Where could they have left to?
Yeah.
They're gone.
They were here and now they're gone.
They're here and they're gone.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
A stick.
So that's those little hints of like seeing the self-identification, the self-centeredness. Like we like to tell ourselves a story that I'm not self-centered. I do things for other people, but a lot of the times we're doing things for other people as that self-centeredness.
Yes.
As identified as that. You know what I mean? I'm a father and I cook for my kids and I go to work for them and I drive through traffic. So see, I'm not selfish because I do all those things for them. But that energy is coming from a place of self-centeredness.
And
right?
they weren't self-centered when they were just the doing.
Yeah.
Picking up the kid. It was a verb.
Yeah.
And then I picked up the kids.
The claim,
and then I was moved to... And I'm always the one. I've always been here from the beginning. There's an I, which is this body.
Yes.
And it's that inevitable blue.
And there's freedom in that of like, you can this is very Buddhist, you can show up and you can sweat and work hard on fixing the fence that fell over, and it's in the hot sun and you're sweating, and you can tell yourself a story that entire time of this is messed up, I shouldn't have to do this, and you can suffer through it. Or you can just do it, it just happens, and then it's over, and you go, oh, It's the same event. It's
the
very
same
Paul,
event.
right? But it's what is the meaning I'm putting into it, you know?
We give everything all the meaning it has at every minute from the Course in Miracles.
Yeah, and
We give everything all the meaning it has every day.
And that is like the most beautiful description of what you are. You are the activity of giving everything all the meaning it has. There's another way of saying you're the dreaming of the dreaming. So this podcast, the name for it is Dream Talking.
Terrific.
Is that cool?
Terrific.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't. It doesn't quite make sense enough. It's like it's pointing. It's throwing it over the head.
Throwing it over the head.
You know.
Throwing it over
Dream
the head.
Talking. That I'm downloading this and listening to it at a different
Exactly.
time.
I don't know what that's about, but I'm going to download it and listen to it.
Yeah.
I don't know what these guys were talking about, but they seem to know each other pretty well.
Yeah. If you don't know what we're talking about, you're good. You're ahead of the game. It's not being claimed. Yeah.
And one more thought on that phrase I use, like psychic mobility, which came to me. I was reminded recently of it's funny how the mind works. I mean, it's such a cliche, but you will remember something from 20 or 30 years ago as if it's just. And I remember this teacher that I referred to at the beginning, sort of a mentor in my 20s. He introduced a small group as to one line from one of the Upanishads. Might have been the Mundaka Upanishad, if there is one, but the line goes like this: "And thus goes the enlightened one, moving up and down the ladders of the world, tasting fruit at every level, crying, 'Oh wonderful, oh wonderful, oh wonderful.'" So what did I just say? The enlightened one, the awakened one, goes up and down the ladders of the world. To me, that would be sometimes you're a personal self, a separate, independent, short-tempered, easy irritated. This is my get off my yard.
And you're very convinced of the fact that you're that.
And it's just de facto. Every conditioning I've had reinforces that in this moment with the traffic problem.
Yes.
Okay, up and down the ladders of the world. Okay, the next step would be a little bit of release from that, a greater release. And well, my family is who I am. Mm-hmm. Anyway, all the way to the radically non-dual awareness, which of course is the way it always is anyway.
Yeah.
Up and down the ladders of the world, tasting food at every level. So you can have a sandwich as an action figure. You can have a bite to eat, so to speak.
Thank God you can.
Yes, thank God you can. We would not survive.
Having that sandwich as a non-dual.
But there will be food at every level. So as in the individual self level, there will be food of, pay unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. You're doing in Rome.
The things that the individual self needs.
Yes, you go to the DMV
activity.
I went to the DMV last week, and I had forgotten to renew my license. Fortunately, I had an experience of unbelievable rapture. I get in there, and she said, "What are you here for?" I went in without an appointment.
Oh, thank God.
And I said, "I'm here to renew my license." She goes, and it wasn't very busy, but I still thought, I'm glad I brought my iPhone because I'm going to be here for an hour. Mm-hmm. And she goes, A35. And as soon as she handed me the slip that said A35, the announcer said, A35,
it's
number 10.
It's a DMV miracle.
DMV miracle. I paid it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And the point is, I had a slight fine. I didn't
late.
tell her that I think I'm exempt from the fine because I'm actually the whole universe.
I'm the center of the universe.
I'm the center, which is true. So is she. I didn't try that because in her view, the DMV says you're the guy on the license.
Yeah.
Keith, with this birth date and this height and this weight and so on and so forth. So up and down the ladders of the world, eating food at every level. So that meant that food was a transaction at the individual self level. Yeah. And other levels, archetypal level is a Jungian level. You can eat food at that level. You talk Jungian. You can have food at the Freudian level, the sociological level. Having food at every level, crying, "Oh wonderful, oh wonderful." In other words, whatever level of being is an expression of the suchness, the
none of it is not
allness.
You.
None of it is not me. That's the other side of neti. Exactly. This is not me. This is not you. This is not me.
See,
but from the radically, it's everything.
Yeah.
It is you. Yeah. There's nothing that's not you, which is why the affirmation, the affirmative, and the negating really reinforce each other.
They really do. You need both.
Because for even Ramana Maharshi, he will say, "Who asks that question? Who has that feeling? Who brings that here? Go ask that. Ask that. No, you're not that. But then, what are you? You're the self.
Yeah,
He will
yeah.
affirm that you are nothing but the same.
I was just
That's
gonna say,
affirmation.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say you could go nitty to the extreme, and I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. But there is a subtle implying that something is saying it's not that. Something is recognizing it's not that. So really, you do actually need to eventually loop back around on itself and go, oh, what is it that knows and sees that I'm none of these things?
And that is
Yeah.
the Brahman, the
Yes.
the infinite,
Give it any
absolute
name you
oneness,
want, yeah.
which is in which all of this is dancing. But you are not to be identified. But you're allowed the dance to the lila,
Yeah,
the play,
Leela.
the play of forms.
Yeah.
This is what Ramana Maharshi would say. So anyway,
I think Adyashanti has a book called, never read it, but the titles kind of says it all. Dancing in Emptiness. It's a real nice little paradox of, or maybe the dance of emptiness, I think is what it is. And that really, like, if you cling too hard to one or the other, you're objectifying it. You're making emptiness an object. Like, there's nothing going on. Okay, well, sure does seem like something's going on, right? Or you can be completely identified with what's going on. I am Nick sitting here
I
at this
came
table.
across a passage the other day. I forget one of the someone either in the Tibetan or the Zen tradition said, "Cling not even to emptiness, for even the appearances will take care of themselves." And I
so good.
pondered
Yes.
that for a while. So what's being said here? And then I read some commentary about what was probably being said. And my sense of it was what other people had thought as well, namely that it's tempting when you have an experience of the emptiness of thing, that after being identified, oh, it's this way, or with some form or another, and you recognize some intrinsic emptiness, that it's not, the meaning is what we give to it.
Exactly.
It can be a way, when you cling to emptiness, it can be a way of saying, therefore, all these forms are not as troublesome anymore. These events in life, because everything's really empty. And the Dodge he was pointing to says, cling not even to emptiness. Now he was implying, okay, you've let go of your attachment to forms. Good.
Yeah.
Now cling not even to emptiness, especially as a way to keep the appearances that you were trying not to cling to, keeping them at bay, because you will see if you stop clinging to emptiness, even the appearances are just arising.
As it is.
They're happenings. They're just as it is. They are not even the problems you're trying to get away from by holding on to emptiness.
Yeah.
And holding on to emptiness can take so many forms. I went through a phase of it in my early sort of Buddhist identification model, where I found that you become the witness, you observe your breath, and then when you find a thought taking you away, you learn to observe it and not get caught in it and come back to your breathing. And there's so there's a kind of recognition of a kind of witnessing.
Yes.
But you become the witness.
Yes.
You can easily become the witness, and you have
And
this
that isn't
Apollonian distance from everything, and you go along with your hands folded near your navel in life and say, I'm not attached to this outcome. I'm not attached to that outcome. And people kind of notice that you're
It's
suddenly
establishing a new
deadened up.
reference point.
You've become dead, and you kind of notice it too. And attachment doesn't mean you're not. It's just you dance. You stop dancing.
Yeah.
So the witnessing, yeah, I called it my internal my meditation project manager. My witnessing, I learned to do meditation, and my internalized meditation project manager.
Yeah.
And that's why I became drawn eventually to move beyond the insight meditation path and to the idea of resting as awareness is what you already are.
Really.
And you can allow whatever, even like we notice there's a subtle difference in that kind of practice in the Tibetan and the Dzogchen and Advaita. You're sitting there, your prior practice would be stick with your breathing, notice the rising and falling, be present. When a thought carries you away, notice it, but bring it back. Well, I came to realize I kind of was sending out lots of posses to recollect, to bring back the thoughts. That thought got away, bring it back to the moment.
Yeah.
So the direct path
I love
approach.
Sam's version of that when recognize the thought, and then he says a couple of different things, but one is look into the nature of the thought, right? Or he says, I do it every day and I still can't remember how he says it. He goes,
Notice seeing it, how it may change it by becoming just seeing it.
Notice when you see it, how does that affect it, right? Or he'll say, watch the thought disappear is another way of like oh, I don't have to do anything with it. Like if you actually, the mental state is so subtle and wispy that sometimes just the interest and attention going on the thought, it just vanishes. that there's some sort of this weird, like, it's the quote unconsciousness of it, which is perpetuating it.
Yes.
And as soon as you just
it's running a track. It's running on a track over here to the right.
Yeah.
You'll be driving along. I'll be driving along all day. All day. I'll be on a long drive or a short drive.
Yeah.
And I was finally saying, gee, there's kind of you're irritated about something today. And meanwhile, I know, my God, there's like a laugh track, but it's not a laugh track. It's a track running parallel.
Yes.
I'm just irritated about this day. And as soon as I draw the circle to include the irritation,
it evaporates.
And there is actually a term for that in the Tibetan practices, the self-liberation of thought. When you bring it is the
self-liberation of thought.
Self-liberation of thought,
yes.
which is that it is the daydreaming that we're not aware of. It's secondary level. It's the second level. They talk about it. Second level. When there's a second level consciousness
current.
Undercurrent. That's the daydream. And when you expand to let that be there, it in fact will, because it's empty. See, it is empty. It's not what you thought it was. But it's only when you allow it off to the side, like, oh, I'm really mad at that guy at that grocery store who talked to me that way. And when you bring that in, you bring it in, draw the circle to include that. It's like, yeah, you were angry, and now it's like, so what? It's just another thing that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, man. And any trying to stop that current is just amping up the current. That's trying to create stillness with activity.
Yes.
More activity, right? But actually, it's just include it. That's really including it in.
I don't have it memorized. You know Rumi's poem, "The Guest House"?
We're knocking at the door. That one.
I don't know if it's knocking at the door, but it's something like, I'll summarize it. I've got it on my phone, but I'd have to call it up from my photos, and it would take 5 minutes or so. But it's something like, every morning, another visitor at the door. Depression, anxiety, agitation, melancholy, spite. Open the door. Let them all in. Even though almost certainly they will wreck the house. They will savage the house. And even though, in so doing that, they will be creating a space for something greater from beyond. I mean, it is it's far more beautiful than that.
That's pretty beautiful.
Coleman Barks translation, but so it's that
instead of like going shadow work, it's Jungian.
And it is, and it's compared, let's say, to a certain kind of practice I was doing, and I don't want to say that it's intrinsic to insight meditation or the Vipassana path. This whole idea: sit with the breathing. When you notice the thought, go notice and come back from the thought. This constant going out. Mm-hmm. Whereas Sam is one step closer by saying, Sam Harris is one step. Like, what happens when you notice that thought? In other words, you begin to welcome that thought.
Yes.
And that gets even more well developed in some of the direct approach passages, which they simply sit as awareness, notice sensation, allow that to be, notice, and then eventually, as far as the instructions would go, notice thinking, allow it to be there, rather than come back to your breathing. In other words, just continue expanding the boundaries, expanding the borders, so that there's nothing that is not welcome. This is sometimes referred to as unconditional non-dualism or unqualified non-dualism, where there is nothing that you can become aware of. It's even like, say yes to... Here's one way it was put by a teacher, Richard Miller, who was a yoga teacher, an incredibly, I have to say, realized guy in this whole field of Nidra yoga, deep relaxation. Anyway, he says, say yes to everything, including to no. Because there are times you must affirm no, but you'll still be affirming no. So when you say no to, when you say yes to everything, a certain, to child abuse?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, say no to child abuse,
That is the
and
way
you
of
are
saying
saying yes to that no.
What's right? Yeah.
You are affirming that is wrong,
Yeah.
but it's from a place of affirmation.
Yes, yeah.
So say yes to everything, including no, sometimes. Because then you'll be saying yes to no when it's appropriate.
Ram Dass says, so. I really like that. So. Which is another way of saying yes. Like, that's saying yes and it is so at the same time.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And really, you can't ever get out of that. You can only ever seem to get out of that.
Well, here's another conversation that we could have, probably not today.
I feel like I'm in a hot tub of this is so great. I love it.
Yes, and we have not smoked enough of anything to make us so that we cannot have the conversation.
No, the natural
which is at some
highs.
point it would have been the case.
Only drug I've taken today is coffee.
But of course, Byron Katie.
Oh yes.
So to me, partly because her story is she had a radical non-dual experience.
Very Eckhart Tolle like.
In that, I actually don't know his story, except apparently he's deeply depressed or suffering,
very
suicidal.
Byron Katie like.
Yeah. Well, she was in that halfway house, and there was a cockroach crawling over her foot, and she realized she did not know what that was, meaning that with the foot. She literally had gone so far and so deep into a void of...
Disidentified or unidentified?
It would have been called a depersonalization experience if she'd taken it to a psychiatrist who would have medicated her and tried to bring her back to... But she tells that story when before the she was even back, she got up and looked in the mirror and saw the eyes. I mean, can you imagine being so void of self in a moment that, to use your analogy of the mirror, you're looking in the mirror and something is looking back, but you don't know, quote, that it's, quote, you or not you.
I've had little taste of that, yeah.
And she went on to formulate the famous 4 questions, which are such good questions in any given moment, is what I'm believing. It's not that she goes, our thoughts are not the problem.
Yeah.
It's believing a thought.
Yes.
It's believe, and that's what the Buddha says too.
Yeah,
the thoughts are coming. They're not yours. They're not yours. It's if you believe them, attached to them, that's when the attachment, that's when the suffering begins. The thought that you're no good is nothing in and of itself.
Empty. Yeah,
but grabbed it and hold on to it. I'm no good. That's the problem.
Yeah, giving everything all the meaning it has.
Giving everything
You're putting all the juice into it.
So her 4 questions are, as you know,
for the listeners.
Is that true? Is it true that you're no good? And you might say yes.
Right. Yeah.
Can you? And then she'll say, sweetheart. If you've ever seen her, she calls everybody sweetheart. Yeah. She is the dearest person in the world.
She's one of the few that I can listen to, Paul. When I see her talk, I have to see her face. Because there's so much being communicated.
And she'll say, sweetheart,
yeah.
Can you absolutely know that's true, that you're no good? And then she'll say, not necessarily in this order, but the 3rd question is, how does it feel? How does it make you feel to believe that? Yeah. Well, the obvious answer, if someone is really, able to have any sentient response, is, I feel pretty crappy. I feel small, angry. And how does it feel when you let go of that? And how does that feels good? Now, and then she'll do the turnaround. She'll say, I'm very good. Say that. Or my husband, whatever the belief is, my husband doesn't love me enough. Let's say that's the belief that you're dealing with, and you've gone through the 4 questions. She'll turn that around. Turn it around. My husband loves me just enough. I don't love my husband enough. Try that one on. In other words, she's basically saying, try all these various stories, because you can see, don't you see, all the stories are the same? Yes. They're stories.
But you have to go through the steps. You can't start with, can you let that go? Because of course I can't let it go. I'm completely identified as the person that, is,
or if you're a spiritual person, you might say, yes, I'm very willing to let it go because I know that that's not doing me any good. Nope, that's a shortcut. You just did, what do they call it?
Spiritual bypass.
You just did a spiritual bypass. No, she just says, honey, is that true?
Yeah.
Can you absolutely know that? Which is actually, I love that one.
Absolutely
because, of course, the answer always has to be no on that one. Unless
you can't know anything.
Because if you still say true, she goes, really? Yeah. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
So...
The can you absolutely know that it's true? I think then back to Sam Harris and consciousness. And then that little loop right there puts me in like the only thing I know is that the lights are on. Everything else is a story, is meaning I'm giving to it. The lights are on. Paul would say there's dreaming, but everything after that is the dream.
And Paul often points out, he says, you've never had to go to a class, a workshop to develop seeing, have you?
I've been seeing all day. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, I've been seeing all day. Or I did a workshop to improve my seeing ability. I've been so exhausted from seeing all day.
Yeah,
he said, right now you're probably looking at your window. You don't think you're done. All of a sudden a bird flies by. You cannot not see that bird.
Yes, that was Sam this morning with the you cannot not hear it. You're hit with it. Yeah, Paul says, "You're Johnny Come Lately on this stuff."
You're always
you come after the conscious contest.
You come to the set after the scene has been shot, and you claimed what a great role.
I
need a rest.
Perfectly.
I need a rest because that scene took a lot out of me. No, the scene happened on its own. Yes. You showed up in front of the camera after it was already over.
Yes.
And that's what the narrator does. And as you know, there's some neuroscience experiments now where people are put in front of computers and said, when I give you the signal, choose either the red or the green sign.
Oh, yeah.
And they're finding, up to 11 seconds in advance, there's brain activity which shows the choice was made before the I said I chose the red one.
Of course.
So it indicates that life, it's a very strong indication that life is happening. And the massiveness of it, including the war and the famine in wherever, that it's maintained, the system is maintaining itself, and meanwhile at the human level, we come in with the concept of efforting and free will. And I have learned, thanks partly to Paul reminding us, look, he never makes the distinction between the absolute and the relative. He does, but it's implied. It's inferred. You can infer it, but. From the absolute level, you can say, sure, free will appears to be a construct. There's no basis for it. At the action level figure, it's not a wise use of time to debate somebody about free will is not true. And I respect Sam Harris for writing his book, Free Will, and making the case to other humans that there's no such...
Yeah.
But it is not a case people are interested. There's no market right now for no free will.
Yeah.
Because our legal system is based on free will. You cannot tell the judge, I didn't do that. I was being a universe when I drove drunk. Thank you, universe. You're still going to get 40 nights in jail.
Yeah, so... Yeah, universe, your next job is now to sit in a jail cell for 40 years, just like you were the universe when you drove drunk. Yeah. Well, the one thing I would say about Sam Harris is that I think it is actually helpful when he does the debating about there being no free will, because me as someone who had never really considered the concept, that just steered my boat in the direction of sort of non-duality. This was before I even knew what the word non-duality was. But I heard his argument for no free will, and I said, I don't get it, but I feel like something gets it. At the time, I might have said my subconscious mind gets it or whatever, right? And it did point me in that direction, which made me then read his book, Waking Up, and then the split brain experiment, which I talked with about Mike last time on the podcast, of, you close one eye and you show the rational side of your brain, I think that's the left brain, the language side, Coke, and then you show the right side, the Coke, and then they get up and they go grab a Coke. Why'd you grab that Coke? And they start rationalizing it. I was thirsty. I've always liked Coke.
It's a real thing.
Yeah, and so those little neuroscience hints prompted me closer and closer towards, and then finding Ramana Maharshi, and boom, it went off from there. But so I think as much as, yes, 99% of people hearing that they don't have any free will, they're either going to hear that as a self that is convinced it has free will and it's not going to do any good, or they're going to just, completely dismiss it. I think it does serve a function. I think it did serve a function for me.
Yes.
Yeah, it guided, it pointed my boat in just enough of the direction that the momentum of that led to,
Yeah, and it's a good operative, and in the psychic mobility context, it's if you're in recovery, you're there as a personal self.
Of course.
If you're to say that you don't have free will is not a useful.
Absolutely not.
At the end of the journey, or maybe at another level of the journey, you can say no, but no.
And again, I'm telling that whole story from where I'm at now.
Right.
If you go back to, I would tell people, man, this guy makes a really good argument for there being no free will. Good luck, in that place, me being able to explain that or even understanding it.
I mentioned it to a friend after I first encountered Sam, and I said, well, there's a real good case that can be made for, no free will. And she's, what? And I said, I gave her the neurological experiments in front of the computer, and that. She said, look, she didn't say so, but look, I planned to be here right now.
Exactly.
I made sure I left town in order to get here.
Yeah.
And I go, you're right. I'm not here to argue against that. I'm not here to have an argument about free will.
And Paul talks about, you'll be convinced you have no free will, and then you'll go and you'll get a mocha instead of a latte, and you go, see?
Right.
Because it's claimed after the action anyway. That's the whole story of selfing, is it's claimed after the activity. So if it's afterwards, it's going to be convinced that it had free will the whole time till that horse in front of the cart is kind of seen. That flip.
Well, I think we should choose to end this conversation. I think we should exercise our free will.
I'm going to exercise my free will and tell one more story.
Okay.
So, this came up for me the other day. This is somewhat anti-Paul, because I'm sure you've noticed he doesn't like telling a story of the awakening experience that he says, he'll say, the most he'll give you is, there was an event.
I was at a meeting.
Yeah.
Not unlike this.
Yeah.
I think that's what he might be referring to.
And I think a lot of people and not to again rag on Adi Shanti, he's great, but he tells the story of his awakening experience. And I would say almost every non-dual teacher, Byron Katie, has an awakening in that story, right? And I think I see both sides of it. If you tell the story to someone who's identified as self, they're going to see it as self is going to have this experience of not-self.
And I want to repeat the one he had.
So let me set
but
up
as
all
a self.
Let me set up all the parameters. So I have this. So as a self, I have the same non-self experience, right? So I can see that it's very unskillful. So that's my best disclaimer I'm going to give. And now I'm going to tell the story of when I felt like there was a crack, when there was, a big. And the reason is because it ties back to the last Paul meeting. So I was driving in San Francisco, just a couple of blocks from where the church is that his talks are on Wednesday night. St.
Andrews.
No,
I think Andrews is in Sausalito.
No, I don't know.
St. Peter's, I don't know.
St. John?
Could be St. John's.
One of those saints. So I was driving. I was listening to his podcast before I'd even seen him in person. So this is maybe a week and a half into finding his podcast, and I just started listening to it obsessively. If you would have stopped me and asked why, I couldn't have told you why. It was very much something was getting it that wasn't, it was going over the head just right. And I found myself very there didn't seem to be a lot of intent behind it, but I'd get in my car in the morning and then Zen Bitch Slap would come on and I'll leave it on. It wasn't like a I'm gonna study this guy because I think he has an answer. It was just like,
yeah.
It was like calming, like soothing, like if you're on a LSD trip or a mushroom trip and you need something to calm you down, that's what listening to Paul was for me. It's like Enya music or Mozart music, just having it on in the background. That's what it was for me at first. So he's talking. Somebody asks a question. I don't remember the exact question, but it was something along the lines of, so once you see all this arising, what sees that, right? And this is something I had heard again and again. Something about his answer, there was a shift, right? And I'm driving, and I had to pull over, because it was it felt like all of a sudden my reality was ripped from under me, all of a sudden I'm in a dream, like I was completely sober, but a feeling of being on drugs. I don't think I can function and drive. So I pulled over, and then I'm sitting there in my truck, and this image came in my head of a waterfall, and that the waterfall flowing is like life, is conscious awareness arising in this moment, and that was we could say God, and that ego is sitting there trying to direct the waterfall, let that flow there, but not there, and that sense of having something to do with it, basically, and a realization that ego or that selfing actually has nothing to do with it. It cannot. What's going to happen is going to happen. That which is directing this dreaming is not the dreamt, and there's a recognition of the dreamt, and there's a recognition of the dreaming. But the visual that came in was like a waterfall. It was very intense. I would put it up there as my most spiritual experience, above any drugs, above anything, probably, in this little story here, in this little lifetime. And I had to get out of the truck, and I walked around, and it was colors were brighter, and it was, and I saw the activity of selfing trying to start up again, like an engine, and then dying, you couldn't get the car started. I'm here, and I see there wants to be a story and interpretation coming in, but it couldn't get going,
Couldn't kick in.
It couldn't kick in. What the engine wasn't turning over, And Paul talks about when you're having an epiphany, normally what stops it is you go, I'm having an epiphany.
Yep,
right?
Look at this epiphany I'm having.
Yeah, and it was who knows in time, maybe it was 5 minutes, an hour, I don't really remember, but there was a feeling of I was even trying to have the thought, something was trying to have the thought, I'm having an epiphany, and that couldn't even land. It was, just, you know what I mean? Yeah, and what really resonates so strongly here is, there was a realization it's always been this way. The waterfall's always been right? And my sense of being the contraction or the that which is resisting it was always an illusion.
It was the add-on.
It was the add-on. It was the extra that was unnecessary. It was, and so all that sort of hit me, and that was before my first meeting with Paul.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the next Wednesday I went and saw him. No, Saturday. It was a Saturday over Sausalito. I saw him for the first time, and so that just sort of just fell into the background of unconscious or whatever. And then the last talk, I don't know if you remember, he was talking about certain things like the Buddha. You can't use the Buddha to seek the Buddha. That which is looking is what you're looking for. That it's like a water. He said waterfall. I never heard him bring up waterfall before. I was like, hey, that metaphor. I remember that metaphor. That came in over here. It's like a waterfall, and that those little things will sort of knock you back into it for a moment, right? And that hit me of like, that's because I have this feeling at his talks almost every single time, unreliably. It comes without me expecting it. I'll sit down, he'll start talking, and I'll just go, I'm home. Like something shows the dreaming. This is dreaming. And it's just I'm home. And I had hints of that before, but nothing has been as like, it's there every time. And it's not like it's gonna come, I know, I'm gonna feel like I'm home again. It like catches me by surprise every time. And it's just like oh yeah, I'm the waterfall, I'm not that which thinks it's, again, see, this is me affirming, but it's just a metaphor for something that's beyond language. But it's like it is this way, whether I know it or not, whether I want it to be this way or not. And Paul said something once too, which is like, this is the ultimate freeing thing to me. So he goes, it actually doesn't even matter if Nick ever wakes up or Keith ever wakes up, because it's not you anyway. And I just go, like we have this story, this Joseph Campbell story of we're on this journey and we need to wake up to realize we never had to wake up, or that we've always been awake, right? But he's like, that doesn't even matter. This is just dreaming. And being able to see that of like, oh yeah, that's about as freeing as a hit as I've gotten.
Wow.
Had to share that.
I think that is a good place to go out on. It opens everything up without anybody trying to close it back down.
Yes, exactly.
Draw the moral of the story.
Yes, no morals.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. This is really awesome. I want to get this recorded. Honestly, you are amazing. You got a great radio voice. You do. You brought me to some places with those streams of consciousness. I really appreciate
and likewise.
it. And we got to do this again.
We should. We just scratched the surface, believe it or not.
Yeah. Oh man, there's hours and hours in the chamber and the bullet and the gun. I can feel it. Thank you, Keith.
All right.
That was great, man.